The notification hit my phone the second my heel touched the jet's carpeted step. Account restricted. Education fund and legacy trust. Transfers paused. Contact compliance. My stomach dipped so hard I tasted metal. Richard Hale was already watching me, calm and pleased, as if he had pressed the button himself. Aspen, February 2025. Snow flashed beyond the oval windows, while the cabin stayed warm, bright, and unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet you buy when you never want to hear the word no. Celeste Hale sat forward with a crystal flute in her hand, Nail's perfect lips relaxed in a smile that did not reach her eyes. Evan, my husband, hovered near the galley pretending to read his phone. He did not look at me. That was the first betrayal small enough for him to deny, later sharp enough for me to feel it in my ribs. The door sealed with a soft sigh. A latch clicked. Leather and cologne filled the air. Richard held out a slim folder. "Before we take off," he said, smooth as a customer service voice, "just housekeeping." The label on the cover read, "Family Protection Paperwork." I opened it. Waiver, consent, trustee update authorization. My name printed neatly, a date already typed in. A paragraph that made my vision narrow: Hale Family Office, appointed administrative trustee with full discretion over distributions and transfers. My fund. The one that had just been frozen. Richard slid a pen across the table like he was sliding a tip. When I did not reach for it, he leaned in his smile, thinning. "You don't get to have opinions on money you didn't earn," he said, quiet enough to sound civilized, loud enough to sting. Celeste did not even bother to lower her voice. "Sign or stop pretending you're family." Evan's silence filled the cabin. He stared at the counter by the galley like it could save him. I did not argue. I did not ask why my account was restricted. I watched instead. The way Richard's watch gleamed like armor. The way Celeste's thumb rubbed the glass stem when she thought no one noticed. The way Evan shifted heel to toe, a man choosing the side that costs him the least. The jet began to roll. A gentle vibration rose through the floor into my bones. Outside, Aspen blurred. Inside, they waited for me to fold. I lowered my eyes to the page and let my face go still. In their world, a reaction is proof you are weak, greedy, unstable, or all three. So I kept my voice locked behind my teeth and read every line like my life depended on it. Because it did. Richard tapped the pen once. "Sign," he said, more impatient now. "It will be easier." I looked at the signature block and felt the shape of their plan. They were not just insulting me, they were reassigning me. From wife to liability, from family to outsider, from person to paperwork. He said it again with the same smug certainty, as if repeating it made it law. "You don't get to have opinions on money you didn't earn." Something in me went cold and clear. Not rage, not panic, clarity. They thought they had locked me out of money. They thought a compliance hold made them powerful. If they knew what I actually owned, what I had built, and what I kept quiet, they would not be laughing on a plane at 30,000 feet. I kept reading slow on purpose, letting seconds stack up like receipts. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. Another timestamp, another confirmation, evidence. The engines rose. The jet lifted smooth as a lie. Celeste settled back, satisfied. Richard turned toward the window, bored now that he believed the outcome was certain. Evan exhaled like the danger had passed, because the danger to him always meant my discomfort, never his. Then the cockpit door opened. The pilot stepped into the aisle with a clipboard and a professional smile. His uniform was crisp. His posture was careful. But when his eyes landed on me, recognition flashed real and immediate, like we had met in a place where people did not pretend. The cabin tightened. Celeste's glass paused. Richard turned irritated at being interrupted. I knew the pilot. Not from this jet, from a different hangar, from a different life. And in my head, I whispered a warning I could not say out loud. Please, do not greet me the old way. Stay with me, because that one sentence turned a jet into a courtroom without a judge. The pilot inhaled and his mouth opened to speak. I thought about the message from compliance, the polite corporate wording, that hid a hard truth someone had called the bank with authority they should not have had. Someone had moved pieces on a board I was supposed to never see. My pulse stayed steady, but my hands were warm, and I pressed my fingertips lightly to the paper to anchor myself. I would not beg. I would not perform. I would let them believe the cage was closed while I memorized every bar. The first night back in Dallas, the jet scene kept replaying behind my eyes like a silent warning that would not shut off. Aspen had been cold, but Highland Park was a different kind of cold, polished and perfumed and perfectly lit. Richard insisted we stay in the main house on Beverly Drive, not a hotel and not our own place, as if proximity was proof of loyalty. The front gate opened smoothly and the cameras followed the car as we rolled past trimmed hedges and a lawn cut so precisely it looked painted. Evan kept both hands on the wheel like he was driving through a test he could fail. I watched the tall windows and bright entry lights and felt that calm, purchased quiet that never makes room for dissent. At the door, Richard did not offer a welcome. He held out his palm. Phone. It was not a request. He added, privacy in this house matters. He nodded to a tray on the console table where Evan had already placed his phone. My chest tightened. Privacy sounded polite, but it landed like control. I set my phone on the tray and felt instantly smaller, like my last lifeline had been turned off with a casual gesture. Richard smiled the way he had smiled on the jet, pleased at how simple it was to move me where he wanted. Then he said the line he would use like a leash. We take care of our own, you are not own yet. The sentence was calm, but it was a fence. Celeste appeared from the hallway in soft cashmere with perfect hair and a look that traveled over me like an inspection. Welcome home, she said, and the word sounded like a private joke. Dinner was already set with white plates, crystal, and candles that made the room glow without feeling warm. Their world was designed to make you grateful for things you did not ask for and afraid to touch anything that was not offered. I sat where they directed me, not beside Evan, but across from Richard like a negotiation table. Evan slid into his seat with a careful smile and avoided my eyes the way people avoid a bruise they helped cause. Celeste began rewriting me as if I were a detail that needed correction. So, she said, turning her glass slowly, tell me again where you are from. I answered simply. She nodded as if she had confirmed a suspicion. You still have that sound, she said. That little edge in your voice. It reads untrained. Evan gave a small laugh that tried to sound supportive, but it landed like agreement. Celeste watched how I held my glass and leaned in with a soft sigh. No, honey, not like that, she said, guiding my fingers. You hold it here. You do not grip. You rest. Her manicured fingertips pressed lightly against my hand, a correction that looked maternal and felt like ownership. I did not pull away. I remembered the jet, the papers, the frozen fund, and I stayed still. Richard talked about donor dinners and charity schedules as if my job was to nod at the right places. He listed rules without calling them rules. We do Sunday lunch. We do gala season properly. We do not discuss family matters outside family. Then he looked at me and repeated his motif slower, more personal. We take care of our own. You are not own yet. After dinner, Celeste guided us through the house like a museum tour, pointing out rooms for upcoming events. You will wear navy or black, she said. Nothing loud, nothing trying. Trying. The word hit with surgical precision. In the guest room, Evan finally spoke like he was offering comfort. Just sign it. It is normal, he said, rubbing his hands together. My dad does paperwork like this all the time. It is how the family stays protected. I kept my voice even. Normal for who? He avoided the question and reached for the same excuse. You are making it bigger than it is. That was his talent, shrinking my fear until it fit inside his convenience. I did not argue. I listened and stored every sentence. Later, after the hallway lights dimmed, I went downstairs alone. The phone tray sat on the console like a small altar to obedience. I did not touch it. I followed my memory to the study near the back where Richard had taken calls earlier. The door was not locked. That was either arrogance or a test. Inside the desk was immaculate, the kind of clean that means someone else handles the mess. On top sat envelopes with thick letterhead beside a leather folder. I did not take anything. I only read what was visible. Hale Family Office. The words looked heavy, official, and familiar in the way powerful systems always do. A page beneath the top sheet had a line that tightened my stomach. Scholarship trust. It was not dramatic. It was worse. It was administrative. It meant my money had become their process. My pocket buzzed. I carried a slim satellite phone for travel because I believed in redundancy. Some habits never die, I answered quietly. A voice said, I will review the numbers tonight. That was all. No greeting and no explanation. I replied with one word. Good. I ended the call and listened for footsteps. None came. Back upstairs, Evan was asleep. I watched his face in the dark and wondered when he decided that his comfort mattered more than my safety. Before dawn, Celeste knocked once and entered without waiting, another rule disguised as normal. Breakfast at 7, she said. We have a planning meeting at 8. I nodded and kept my expression neutral. All day I stayed inside their family system, moving from breakfast to a calendar review, to a lunch where Richard introduced me to a country club couple as Evan's wife, then corrected himself. Newly, he said, smiling. Still learning how we do things. In the afternoon, Evan repeated the same message in softer language. If you just cooperate, it will get easier. I thought about the consent paperwork, the way it tried to sound routine while it reached for control. I knew what trustee change authority meant. I knew what consent can be used to excuse later. But when Celeste asked if I understood, I let my eyes widen slightly, and I asked the question they expect from someone harmless. So it is just a form. Celeste relaxed the way people relax when they think the trap has finally been accepted. That night when the house settled again, I returned to the study and opened the top drawer with one careful pull. There it was, a copy of the consent form clipped neatly, ready to be produced as proof. I stared at the line where my name should have been perfect, because people like Richard do not tolerate errors. And there it was, one letter wrong, Lux printed as LVX. My throat went dry. It was small, almost nothing, the kind of mistake most people would miss. I did not miss it, because if they could misspell my name, they could have signed it without me, and they could have done it on purpose. The next morning, the wrong letter in my name sat in my mind like a splinter under skin, small but impossible to ignore. I moved through the house as if nothing had changed, because in a place like this, the moment you show fear, they name it instability and use it against you. At breakfast, Richard wore a pressed shirt and a calm smile, and Celeste poured coffee as if we were a normal family. Evan looked tired, eyes slightly red, the way people look when they have been warned in private and told to carry the message. Richard spoke first, casual and precise, like he was discussing landscaping. We need that paperwork finalized today. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. When I did not answer quickly, he leaned back and tapped the table once with his finger, a soft sound that made the room feel smaller. If you do not sign, he said, Evan will lose his position in the family company. Evan flinched as if the words were a hand at his throat. I kept my face still. My chest tightened, but I did not let it rise into my voice. Richard watched me the way a man watches a lock after he turns the key, waiting for the click that proves it worked. Celeste added sweetness like sugar on a blade. This is not punishment, she said. It is protection. We minimize liabilities. She slid a new folder toward me. Family budget agreement. Prenup addendum. A neat stack of pages with tabs like my life was something you could file and manage. Sign this as well, she said. It is standard. You will feel safer once everything is structured. Evan finally spoke, too fast, too rehearsed. Just sign it. It is normal. The same sentence again, as if repetition could make coercion look like tradition. I turned a page slowly, letting my fingertips skim the paper. It had a monthly cap, a spending approval process, and language that framed access as a privilege, not a right. I knew the terms. I knew how clauses like this could be used later to claim I had agreed to be restricted. But I let my brows lift slightly, the harmless expression Celeste preferred. "So this is just for budgeting," I said. Richard's smile returned. He liked me most when I sounded unsure. "Exactly," he said, and then he repeated his motif as if it were family scripture. "We take care of our own, you are not own yet." After breakfast, they took us to the garage as if we were leaving for something pleasant. The air outside was warm, bright, and still. The driveway curved through perfectly trimmed hedges. A security camera tilted as we walked past. Evan held the car keys. Richard stayed by the door watching. It was a small stage. Evan stopped beside the car and leaned close, his voice low. "Please do not fight them," he said. "You do not understand how this works." I looked at him, waiting for him to understand how it sounded. He did not. He reached for my hand. When I did not move, his fingers closed around my wrist. Not a punch, not a shove, nothing dramatic, but a squeeze that turned my bones into a warning. His grip tightened until heat surged under my skin. "Lux," he said through his teeth. "Stop." My breath stayed steady, but my vision sharpened the way it does when your body realizes the danger is close. I felt the pressure like a clamp. I did not pull away fast. I let myself register every detail. The position of his thumb, the slight tremor in his hand, the way he looked past me instead of at me like he was trying not to see what he was doing. When he finally released me, a red mark bloomed around my wrist, a ring that would not fade quickly. It was not a bruise yet, but it was proof. Evan spoke as if he had done nothing. "You are making this harder," he said. The words were absurd, and that absurdity made something cold settle deeper in me. Coercive control does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with a gentle house and a family rule and a husband who chooses fear over decency. In the car, Evan drove toward the country club for a planning luncheon. Celeste insisted on because appearances were their religion. I watched neighborhoods slide past and felt the urge to reach for my phone to check my accounts, to call someone to do anything that proved I still existed outside their system. But my phone was still on the tray in the hallway at home. Privacy, Richard had called it. It felt like isolation now. At the luncheon, Celeste introduced me to women in pearls and soft voices, and asked me to smile more, to speak less, to hold my glass correctly. She made small remarks that sounded harmless, but landed like bruises. "Your background gives you a certain toughness," she said in front of others as if I were a charity project. Richard spoke about the family business and Evan's future like Evan was a promotion he owned. I heard the subtext everywhere. "Sign and you can stay. Resist and we will erase you." Back at the house late afternoon, I retrieved my phone from the tray with hands that did not shake. The moment it connected, notifications stacked like a quiet avalanche. I opened my bank app first because the education fund alert from the jet still burned behind my eyes. There was a message thread from compliance, polite and firm, repeating that restrictions were in place pending verification of authority changes. I scrolled. My pulse stayed even, but my focus sharpened. Then I saw it. Mailing address updated for trust correspondence. New address, Hale Family Office. I stared at it until my eyes stung. They had redirected the mail, the paper trail, the quiet evidence that most people never notice until it is too late. My scholarship fund had always been in my name long before Evan, long before this house, long before the way Celeste looked at me like I should apologize for existing. Now the mail would go to them. Richard walked into the hallway behind me unhurried. "All set," he said, as if I had just agreed to dinner reservations. Evan appeared beside him, trying to look calm. He looked at my phone screen and then away. He did not ask what I saw. He did not want to know. I lifted my eyes to Evan. "Why did the trust mail get changed?" I asked quietly. Evan swallowed. Then he said the sentence that made my stomach drop lower than the jet notification had. "You do not need access. My dad handles it." The calm in his voice was worse than yelling. It meant he had accepted the logic. It meant he wanted me to accept it too. I did not argue. I tapped through my notifications with controlled movements. Another alert appeared. New authorized user added. It was on a secondary account linked to household expenses, the kind of account most people ignore because it feels small. The name was unfamiliar. My throat went tight. I took a screenshot, then another. Then I opened my secure cloud folder, the one I used for sensitive documents, and uploaded the images immediately. I wrote a note with the date and time and exactly what I saw. I did it with the steady calm of someone who has handled risk before, not because I wanted drama, but because this was no longer about feelings. This was about evidence. Upstairs in the guest room, I looked at the red mark on my wrist under the bathroom light. It was still there, faint but clear. I took a photo. I saved it to the same folder. In the mirror, my face looked composed, but my eyes looked awake in a way they had not looked in months. I opened my calendar and created an appointment. Routine appointment. Estate planning review. Location New York. I did not explain it to anyone. I did not ask permission. I just said it, because the moment they redirected my trust mail, this stopped being family tension and became a financial threat with a paper trail. And I was done pretending I did not know how to read it. I slept with my phone under my pillow like a teenager hiding messages, except I was not hiding romance. I was hiding proof. The red mark on my wrist faded into a faint shadow, but the sense of pressure did not fade at all. By morning, the house was already in motion, staff moving quietly, Celeste scheduling Richard calling people as if he owned time itself. I moved through it with a calm face and a busy mind. The first thing I did after breakfast was wait until the hallway was empty. Then I opened my laptop at the small desk in the guest room and logged into the trust portal using the credentials I had kept for years. For a moment, the site spun and loaded slowly, and my heart beat once hard, as if the system could decide whether I deserved to see my own money. Then the dashboard appeared. Legacy Trust, Scholarship Trust, Education Fund. Each line looked clean and normal until I clicked Transactions. That is where the lie lived. A charge label sat in the middle of the page like a stain you cannot wipe off. Consulting fee. The amount made my fingers go cold. 7 figures. Not 1,000, not a mistake you can explain away with a typo. The kind of money people move only when they believe they have permission, or when they do not care whether you notice. I clicked into the details. The description was vague intentionally, so the way financial language becomes fog when someone wants to hide a trail. Vendor name unfamiliar. Approval notes blank. I scrolled further and found another consulting fee slightly smaller, still enormous. I felt my stomach drop with the same clean shock as the jet notification. They were not just insulting me. They were extracting. They were turning my trust into a family resource and calling it structure. I took screenshots of everything, including the dates, the vendor line, the account numbers, and the page header that proved this was not a rumor. I saved the files into my secure cloud folder and wrote a note beneath each one, time-stamped factual, no emotion. Evidence is not poetry. Evidence is boring on purpose. Downstairs, I heard Celeste laugh softly at something on her phone, a light sound that made my skin crawl. I thought about her saying, minimize liabilities, as if my autonomy was a liability. I closed my laptop and went to the mail table near the kitchen, where staff sorted envelopes each day. Most of the mail was addressed to Richard or Celeste, thick paper invitation statements, polished envelopes with embossed logos. There among them was an envelope from the bank, the one that used to send trust notices directly to me. It was addressed to Hale Family Office now, exactly as I had seen in the portal. But it was not sealed the way it should have been. The flap lay flat, too flat, with a faint crease that did not match factory sealing. I slid my finger along the edge and felt a different texture where glue should have been. The adhesive line was uneven, like someone had opened it carefully and resealed it with something else. A different seal, a different hand. My throat tightened. This was not a misunderstanding. This was interference. I did not rip it open. I took a photo of the flap close enough to show the glue line. I took a second photo with the envelope beside a ruler from the desk drawer because scale matters. Then I placed it back exactly where I found it and walked away as if I had only come to check the coffee pods. In the study, I began building what I needed: a binder. I chose a plain black one from the shelf and labeled it in simple block letters with a pen. Bank letters, trust notices, email headers, phone logs. No drama, no cute title, just categories that would hold weight with anyone who understood systems. I printed the Trust Portal transaction pages. I printed the compliance messages from my phone and highlighted the phrase, restrictions paused, pending verification. I printed the screenshot showing the mailing address, changed to Hale Family Office. I wrote the date and time at the top of each page. I added a section for the physical evidence photo of the resealed envelope. I did not take the original because I did not want them to notice it missing. People like Richard notice missing paper the way predators notice a door left open. That afternoon, while Celeste was out and Richard was on a long call, I sat in the guest room and dialed the bank hotline number listed in the compliance message. A recorded voice guided me through menus. I chose trust services. I chose fraud. My hand did not shake. When a human finally answered, her tone was calm and practiced. I gave my name, spelled it, and said slowly, clearly, "I need to request a fraud affidavit." The silence on the line lasted a half-second longer than normal, the kind of pause that means the person has switched from customer service to protocol. She asked security questions. I answered. She asked whether I recognized the consulting fee transactions. I said no. She asked whether I had authorized any trustee changes, mailing address changes, or additional users. I said no. She asked whether I suspected identity compromise. I said, I suspect unauthorized changes initiated by a third party. I heard the typing. I listened to the way the keys clicked faster when the story becomes serious. The representative explained that an affidavit would trigger an internal review and could result in account restrictions and potential reversal pending investigation. I said very carefully that I understood, and I requested the affidavit be sent to a secure address, not Hale Family Office. She took the address. I thanked her. I ended the call and added the call log to my binder, including the time and the name of the representative. Then I opened my email and searched for recent messages. There it was, a thread from Hale Family Office to the bank with a header visible in preview. It mentioned administrative trustee. It mentioned minimize processing delays. It used language that sounded professional, like it had been written by someone who knew exactly how to make theft sound like compliance. I opened the email details and printed the full header information, because email headers tell the truth even when the body lies. I added it to the binder under email headers. A few hours later, Evan returned quiet and tense. He found me at the desk and tried to sound normal. "Mom wants you downstairs," he said. His eyes flicked to the printer tray and back. He saw the paper but did not ask. He did not want to be implicated. That told me everything. Downstairs, Richard sat on the sofa with a folder in his lap, as if he were waiting for a meeting. Celeste stood behind him, hands on the back of the chair, posture perfect. Richard patted the cushion beside him. I did not sit. I stayed standing. Richard lifted the folder slightly. "We can wrap this up now," he said. I asked one question, gentle, harmless on the surface. "What is the consulting fee in my scholarship trust?" Celeste blinked once. Richard did not. His expression did not change because men like him practice that skill. "It is just paper," he said, dismissive. Then he added with a small smirk, "Don't pretend it's yours." The words hit clean and sharp, more insulting because they were delivered like a fact. My chest tightened, but my face stayed still. I nodded once as if I accepted the explanation. I did not correct him. I did not argue about whose name was on the trust. I did not say the obvious, that paper is exactly what ownership is made of. I simply stored the sentence because it was an admission of attitude, and attitude matters when intent is questioned. That night, I confirmed the New York appointment on my calendar and sent myself a reminder with the binder list. In the morning, I sat in the back of the car while Evan drove me to the airport, silent, jaw tight. He did not apologize. He did not ask about my wrist. He did not ask about the consulting fees. He asked only one thing. You are not going to do something crazy, right? I looked out the window at Dallas moving past like a clean lie. No, I said softly. I am going to do something normal. In New York, the attorney's office smelled like paper and calm. She was direct mid-50s, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who does not waste words because she has spent a career watching people lose everything while pretending it is fine. I handed her the binder and watched her flip through it with fast, precise movements. She stopped at the consulting fee pages. She checked the resealed envelope photo. She read the bank compliance message. Then she looked up at me and said the sentence that turned my fear into a plan. If they touched your trust, this isn't family drama. This is fraud. When the New York attorney said fraud out loud, the word did not explode the way I expected. It landed with quiet weight, like a gavel placed on a desk without ceremony. I flew back to Dallas the same day because in their world leaving looked like guilt, and guilt was the story they wanted to tell. On the drive from the airport, Evan tried to reset the tone like nothing had happened. He talked about the upcoming charity gala as if it were a normal obligation, as if the past week had not been a chain tightening around my wrist and my money. Celeste had insisted on my attendance, not because she wanted me there, but because she wanted me on display proof that the family was stable and generous and above suspicion. Highland Park glittered at night streets lined with soft lighting and quiet wealth, the kind that never admits its teeth. At the house, staff moved quickly to prepare me. A dress waited in my room, navy modest expensive in a way that tried to look humble. It fit perfectly, which meant Celeste had known my measurements, which meant someone had been watching more closely than I realized. I put it on without comment and pinned my hair back the way she preferred. In the mirror, I looked like the version of myself they could present to donors, softened, polished, quiet. Inside my binder sat in my carry-on bag like a heartbeat I did not show. The gala took place downtown at a renovated historic venue. White columns, bright florals, a stage with a foundation logo, and cameras positioned at angles that made every smile look sincere. Celeste floated through the room in a champagne-colored gown, greeting people with perfect warmth, laughing lightly, touching wrists and elbows, as if affection were her natural language. Richard moved like a man who expected doors to open before he reached them. Evan stayed at my side until we were close enough to their circle. Then he drifted half a step away instinctively, choosing where he belonged. When Celeste approached a group of donors, she beckoned me forward with 2 fingers, not a wave. She placed a hand on my back and guided me into the circle like an accessory. "This is Lux," she said, smiling. Then she tilted her head and added, "Evans +1." The words were casual, almost playful, but they sliced. +1. Not wife, not family. Just an add-on. I felt heat rise under my collar, but I kept my expression calm. A woman in pearls glanced at my ring, then looked away. Someone else asked how long I had known Evan. Celeste answered for me as if my voice was not needed. "She is adjusting," Celeste said. "We are helping her find her place." Richard stepped in with a chuckle and delivered the line he knew would land as charming to them and humiliating to me. "She's learning how money works," he said, smiling at the group. Laughter followed, polite and practiced. I looked at the faces around me and saw how quickly people accept cruelty when it is wrapped in sophistication. Richard sipped his drink and continued, still smiling. "It is admirable, really, the way she is trying." Trying again. The same word. Celeste nodded as if proud. Evan gave a small laugh, a thin sound that did not defend me and did not challenge them. The disappointment was sharp because it was familiar. I had not married into a family. I had married into an image, and my role was to never crack it. Later during the program, Celeste insisted on a public moment. She led me to a side table where gifts were displayed for select donors and committee members, the kind of gesture that was meant to look generous and personal. She held up a small box and smiled brightly. "Lux, darling, I found something for you," she said loudly enough that nearby guests could hear. She handed me a gift that weighed almost nothing. Inside was a simple scarf, the kind you buy at an airport boutique when you forgot you needed one. It was not ugly. It was just small, thoughtless, and safe, exactly the kind of gift given to someone you do not value. Celeste watched my face for disappointment, the way a cat watches a mouse hesitate. I smiled and thanked her. Immediately after, she turned to another woman, a donor I recognized from the program booklet, and presented a jewelry case. The room seemed to pause. The woman opened it and gasped as diamonds caught the light. Celeste clasped the woman's hands and said, "For everything you do for us." The contrast was the point. She wanted the room to notice who mattered and who did not. I stood there holding my scarf box like proof of my position. Richard leaned toward a man beside him and spoke softly, but not softly enough. "She came from nothing," he said, polite and amused, as if he were explaining a rescue. Then he added a sentence that sounded supportive until you heard the poison inside. "We are glad to help her learn responsibility. Some people see money and get ideas." The man laughed. It was the kind of laugh that carries agreement without accountability. Richard glanced at me and smiled, then said with careful charm, "Of course Lux is different. She is grateful. She understands generosity." He did not say gold digger, but he did not need to. The implication hovered in the air, clean and toxic. I felt my face stay composed while my stomach tightened. Evan heard it. I saw him hear it. And instead of speaking, he smiled the same thin smile he used at board dinners, a smile that said, "Do not rock the boat." His silence was not neutral. It was permission. I stepped away from the group and moved toward the foundation table where staff managed event materials. I did not rush. I did not look angry. I looked like a committee wife with a question. I waited until the volunteer coordinator had a free moment. "Hi," I said, gentle, polite. "Could I get a copy of the donor list and the foundation minutes from the last meeting? Evan and I are trying to understand how everything is structured." I used the word structured because Celeste loved it. The coordinator brightened, eager to be helpful. "Of course," she said. "I can email those to you." I nodded. That would be wonderful. I gave her an email address I controlled. I did not explain why I wanted the minutes. I did not need to. Minutes are where people hide approvals. Donor lists are where money becomes cover. Richard liked paperwork when it served him. I was learning to like it when it served me. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I glanced down and saw the caller ID, Fleet Manager. My pulse did not change, but my fingers paused for half a beat. I could feel how dangerous it would be if anyone heard that title in this room in this moment. Richard would not understand it at first, but Celeste would sense the shift and she would dig. I declined the call and locked the screen without answering. No sound, no trace. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and returned to Evan as if nothing had happened. The night ended with applause photos and the kind of public warmth that made strangers believe in their goodness. In the car, on the way home, Evan exhaled like he had survived something. "See," he said, trying to sound reassuring, "it went fine." I stared out the window and said nothing. Fine was what people say when they want you to forget the humiliation. Back at the house, I went straight to the study. My hands moved with quiet purpose. I opened my email and saw a new message from the bank compliance team. Attached were documents submitted earlier that day. Hale Family Office had sent a packet to the bank to change trustee authority. No signature from me, no authorization from me. Just their letterhead, their confidence, their assumption that I would stay quiet. My throat tightened. The gala was not just a social punishment. It was cover. While they paraded me as a +1, they were moving to take formal control of my trust. After the gala, the house changed its tone, the way weather changes before a storm, quiet, but charged. Richard stopped pretending patience. He called me into the study one morning without greeting and leaned back in his chair like a man rehearsing authority. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He said the sentence calmly, almost kindly, as if offering advice. "If you fight us, we will bury you in legal fees." He watched my face for fear. I gave him none. I nodded once the way you nod when you hear a rule you already plan to break. Celeste did not confront me directly. She chose a softer weapon. I began to notice the shift in conversations when relatives visited or called. Voices lowered, questions became cautious. I overheard her in the breakfast room telling an aunt that I was unstable, that I was obsessed with money, that stress had made me paranoid. She said it with concern, the kind that poisons reputations quietly. By the time I entered the room, the story had already been planted. I smiled, poured coffee, and listened. This was not chaos. This was coordination. That afternoon, I began the part of the process that never looks dramatic on the outside. I called the bank again and requested duplicate statements for every account tied to my trust be sent to a secure mailing address that only I controlled. The representative confirmed the change and read the address back to me. I wrote down the confirmation number and placed it in my binder. Next, I drove to a branch across town and opened a safe deposit box in my own name. I chose the smallest size. I did not need space. I needed separation. I placed original documents inside trust instruments, notarized letters, and printed statements with bank seals. Paper has weight when people try to deny it. Before leaving, I enrolled in credit monitoring and placed an identity freeze across my personal and trust-related profiles. The clerk explained the steps slowly. I thanked her and followed each one. Control returns in increments. I scheduled a meeting with a forensic CPA recommended by my New York attorney, someone who spoke in neutral sentences and asked questions that assumed competence. We met in a small office with a view of a parking lot, no drama, no leather chairs. I laid out the binder and watched him scan the pages. He pointed to the consulting fees and asked who approved them. I said no one with authority. He nodded and made notes. He explained how funds are traced, how improper use shows patterns, how jets and maintenance often appear when people believe they can blur personal and trust expenses. He did not promise outcomes. He explained process. That was enough. Back at the house, I kept my behavior unchanged. I attended dinners. I answered questions politely. I did not argue when Celeste corrected me in front of staff. I did not respond when Richard spoke over me. Silence unsettles people who rely on reaction. One evening, while I stood in the kitchen pretending to read a recipe card, I recorded a conversation on my phone held loosely at my side. Celeste spoke to the housekeeper in a low voice, not knowing I was listening. "Watch her," she said. "Make sure she does not take papers from the study." The housekeeper murmured agreement. I stopped the recording, saved the file, and labeled it with date and time. Evidence does not care about intention. It records behavior. The forensic CPA emailed me later that night. Preliminary review confirmed trust funds had been used to pay for jet maintenance tied to Richard. The amount was not small. It was repeated. I read the email twice, then added it to the binder. That was the moment I felt the structure of the game clearly. They were not improvising. They had been doing this because no one had stopped them before. The next move came disguised as an invitation. Celeste handed me an envelope after dinner with a practiced smile. Inside was a printed itinerary for a trip to Aspen, dates highlighted, private jet details listed. Her tone was light. A family reset, she said. A chance to clear the air. I did not ask questions. I thanked her and placed the envelope on the table. In my head, I understood exactly what it was. A trap to isolate me again, to pressure me into signing under the cover of altitude and urgency. That night alone in the guest room, I pulled up the flight details and checked the tail number out of habit. I always did. The number meant something to me in a way it did not to them. I did not react. I simply noted it. I added the invitation to my binder under planned pressure events. The following morning, Richard called me into the study again. His tone was sharper now, irritation slipping through. He asked whether I was coming to Aspen. I said yes. He smiled for the first time in days. He thought compliance was returning. He did not know preparation looks the same as surrender when you are quiet. I spent the rest of the day making small adjustments. I updated passwords. I forwarded bank notices to my secure address. I sent a brief message to the forensic CPA confirming authorization to proceed. I made a checklist and crossed off items slowly. No one noticed because nothing looked different. That was the point. That evening, Evan found me in the hallway. He looked tired, pulled thin by loyalties he had chosen without understanding the cost. He told me his mother was worried. He said everyone thought I was spiraling. He asked me to stop pushing. I looked at him and said only one thing. I am not pushing. I am standing still. He did not understand. People who benefit from motion mistake stillness for weakness. Later, after the house went quiet, I sat at the desk and opened my email. I typed a short message to a single contact. Proceed with the reposition plan. I did not add context. I did not explain timing. The reply came back a few minutes later. Understood. I closed the laptop and placed it in the drawer. Outside my window, Dallas lights hummed with ordinary life. Inside the house they slept, believing control remained with them. I lay down and rested for the first time in days because the pieces were finally in motion, and the point of no return was closer than any of them realized. The morning of the Aspen flight, the house felt staged like everyone had been assigned a role and a camera angle. Celeste moved with bright efficiency, smiling too much, speaking too softly, as if kindness could erase what she had already done. Evan hovered near the entryway tense, checking his watch, asking if I had everything packed. Richard did not come downstairs until the car was already waiting. When he did, he wore a coat that looked expensive without trying, and the expression on his face was not excitement. It was satisfaction. He believed the trip would finish what the legal threats and social humiliation had started. He believed altitude would make me small. On the drive to the private terminal, no one talked about the trust. They talked about weather and schedules and restaurants in Aspen, all surface, all distraction. I watched the city fall away and thought about my binders sitting in the safe deposit box, about duplicate statements moving to my secure address, about the forensic CPA ready to trace every misuse. I did not rehearse arguments. I rehearsed calm. The private terminal was quiet, and bright polished floors soft lighting a desk with a smiling receptionist who did not ask questions. When we walked onto the tarmac, the jet waited like a trophy. Crew stood nearby, attentive professional eyes trained to avoid family dynamics. Richard loved that kind of audience. He liked people who could not respond. As we climbed the steps, Celeste leaned slightly toward the flight attendant and said something in a low voice, then glanced at me with a small smile, the kind that suggests a joke at someone else's expense. Inside the cabin smelled like cold leather and citrus, the kind of scent chosen to feel clean and superior. Crystal glasses were already set. A tray held bottled water arranged like a display. Everything looked effortless because effort is what wealthy people hide. I took my seat without hesitation. Richard chose the position that let him see everyone. Celeste sat close enough to control the conversation. Evan sat beside me, but not touching his posture tight, as if closeness might count as betrayal to his parents. The door sealed. The engine noise softened into a steady hum. The plane began to move. Richard waited until the jet lifted and the seatbelt sign chimed off before he performed the part he enjoyed most. He laughed loudly at something on his phone, not because it was funny, but because he wanted the crew to hear that laughter and associate it with power. Then he turned to me with the same loud confidence. He held up a folder and a pen, as if he were granting me a privilege. His voice was bright, almost playful, but the intention was sharp. Sign, he said, extending the pen across the aisle. You will feel better once you stop pretending. The crew member pouring water paused for half a second, then continued, eyes down, train neutrality. Evan shifted. I felt his knee press slightly closer, not comfort, but pressure. He leaned in and spoke low, urgent, the way someone speaks when they want to avoid embarrassment. Lux, just do it, he whispered. It is normal. The same sentence from Dallas now repeated in the air, now harder to resist because there was nowhere to go. Celeste leaned forward and placed her hand lightly on the folder as if she owned the paper. Her smile was gentle, almost maternal. Then she delivered her line with clean finality. No signature, no more family. The words did not sound like a threat when she said them, because she dressed them in calm. But I heard what she meant. No signature, no home, no protection, no belonging, and Evan would be punished for choosing me. Richard watched my face the way a man watches a lock turn. He expected fear. He expected pleading. I opened the folder slowly. The paperwork was thicker than before, more formal, more dangerous. A waiver, a consent, language about minimizing liabilities, language about administrative changes. On page 3, a clause sat highlighted in pale yellow. I scanned it and felt my breath pause. The number inside it was not vague. It was blunt. 8 figures. A transfer authorization that would shift control of a substantial portion of the scholarship trust and related assets, the kind of money that can fund lives, the kind of money that can disappear quietly if no one is watching. My fingers held the page steady. The jet hummed. The air felt colder. Richard leaned back and said softly now, as if he were offering me wisdom. You do not get to have opinions on money you did not earn. He let the sentence hang. Then he smiled and repeated the earlier command like a finish line. Sign. Evan's hand moved. He did not grab my wrist this time. He placed his palm lightly on my forearm and pushed the pen closer, a small physical nudge-controlled quiet. The pressure was the same. My mind did not race, it narrowed. I saw the crew member's reflection in the glossy cabinet door. I saw Celeste's nails pale pink perfect. I saw Richard's watch heavy smug. I saw Evan's jaw clench as if he were the one suffering. I kept my face calm and turned one more page not because I needed to read it, but because I needed one more second. That was when the cockpit door opened. The pilot stepped out, professional mid-flight posture, checking something on a tablet. He glanced toward us as part of standard procedure. Then his eyes landed on me. For a fraction of a second, his expression shifted. Not surprise, not fear, but recognition, the kind that comes from real familiarity. My stomach tightened not with panic, but with the awareness that the room was about to change. Richard followed the pilot's gaze and smirked, as if he were enjoying a show. He leaned slightly toward the crew and said loud enough to be heard, "She is still learning how money works," as if repeating his favorite line would keep control intact. The pilot took a step closer, respectful, neutral, and spoke in a clear voice that carried without effort. "Ms. Lux, do you want your Gulfstream or Bombardier repositioned first?" The cabin went silent so fast it felt like the air had been pulled out. The hum of the air conditioning became suddenly loud, mechanical, exposed. Celeste's smile froze. Evan's hand dropped away from my arm as if he had been burned. Richard did not understand for 1 second. I watched the confusion flicker across his face, the quick calculation, the attempt to turn what he heard into something harmless. Then comprehension arrived, and his expression locked as if his features had been pinned in place. He stared at the pilot, then at me, then back again, and for the first time since I entered this family, he looked unsure of the room. I did not smile. I did not lift my chin. I did not announce anything. I simply exhaled a small breath I had been holding for days and kept my hands resting lightly on the folder. Quiet power does not need performance. Richard's voice came out strained, sharper than he intended. "What did you just call her?" The pilot met his eyes without flinching. "Ms. Lux," he said again, perfectly professional. And the moment hung there unfinished like a door that had opened and could not be closed. The rest of the flight moved in a strange, slow motion, as if the cabin itself was waiting for someone to admit what had just happened. Richard tried to recover first. He cleared his throat, forced a laugh that sounded too thin, and said something about a misunderstanding about staff using formal titles, about how everyone on board should focus on safety. Celeste looked out the window as if scenery could save her. Evan sat rigid beside me, eyes fixed on the folder, no longer pushing the pen, no longer sure which side of the paper he was on. I stayed quiet. I did not explain. I did not correct anyone. I let the silence do what it was meant to do, because for years they had used silence against me, and now the same tool belonged to me. When the jet began its descent, the pilot returned to the cockpit without another word, leaving the sentence behind like a seal stamped on the air. Richard kept glancing at his phone, tapping the screen harder than necessary. His confidence was still there, but it had shifted into something desperate, the way confidence looks when it needs to prove itself. Celeste adjusted her scarf, then her bracelet, then her posture, small motions that betrayed panic. Evan finally leaned toward me, his voice low, shaken. "Lux, what is going on?" I turned my head slightly and met his eyes for a moment. I said nothing. If I spoke now, it would turn into argument, and argument would give them something to fight. I needed them exposed, not entertained. We landed at the private terminal in Aspen. The wheels touched down with a soft thud, and the cabin lights warmed. Richard stood too quickly, smoothing his coat like he could smooth the moment. As we taxied, I looked through the window and saw the hangar area and the familiar polished environment where Richard liked to perform. A car waited. A set of doors. A few people standing near the FBO entrance with clipboards and tablets. This was his stage. He had chosen it for a reason. He believed he would walk off the jet with me defeated and compliant, signing papers in the air, like a child agreeing to rules. He did not know the stage was about to belong to someone else. The door opened. Cold aspen air rushed in. We stepped down the stairs. Richard went first, chest forward, greeting the ground crew with casual authority. Celeste followed, smiling too brightly. Evan stayed half a step behind them, and I walked last, letting them create the illusion of control for one more second. Near the hangar, a man in a tailored coat waited beside an aviation broker type with a sleek folder. Another person stood slightly apart, a woman with a tablet and a lanyard from a bank. I recognized the posture instantly, the kind of professional neutrality that comes from compliance roles. Richard's smile sharpened. He stepped toward them as if they were there for him, which of course they were. The broker extended a hand. "Mr. Hale, good to see you," he said. "We have the refinance package ready for signature." Richard nodded and began speaking too fast, too loud, as if momentum could reassert hierarchy. "Excellent," he said. "Let us get this done quickly. We have a schedule." The bank representative glanced at her tablet, then looked up, her eyes moving between faces, searching for the correct decision maker. The pilot stepped down from the jet behind us and walked directly toward the group with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what was required. He nodded to the broker, then turned slightly toward me. "Owner side is here," he said. Not loud, not dramatic, just a simple operational statement spoken in front of everyone. The words landed like a bright light switching on in a room Richard thought he owned. Richard's smile did not vanish instantly. It twitched first, then held, then cracked. "Owner side," he repeated, trying to shape it into a joke. He laughed once too sharp. "That is funny. We are handling things." The pilot did not react. The broker looked down at his paperwork, then back at the bank representative. The bank representative stepped forward with polite firmness. For the refinance and any associated transfer authorization, she said, "We need the authorization of the beneficial owner." Her gaze settled on me because her screen told her where authority actually lived. Richard's face changed. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I could see him calculating whether he could bully the room the way he bullied me. But this was not a dining room. This was paperwork and compliance and risk. Celeste took a small step closer to Richard, murmuring something I could not hear, probably a warning, probably a plea. Evan stared at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, not as his wife, but as a variable he never accounted for. The broker cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale," he said carefully, "the lender requires clean funds and verified authority. We cannot proceed if there is a question." Richard straightened. His voice turned colder. "There is no question," he said. "My family handles our finances. She is my daughter-in-law." He gestured toward me as if I were property. I looked at the bank representative and spoke for the first time since the cockpit door opened, not with anger, not with triumph, just with precision. "Please pause that transfer." One sentence. The exact sentence I had practiced for this moment. The bank representative did not hesitate. "Of course, Ms. Lux," she said, already tapping her tablet. Richard blinked, stunned by the sound of my name spoken with that title, by someone who mattered in his world. He leaned forward, voice rising. Pause what transfer? There is nothing to pause. The bank representative met his eyes with calm, compliant strength. We cannot proceed without her authorization, she said. This includes any transfer related to the trust accounts and any refinance structure that touches those funds. Richard's skin went pale under the aspen light. The broker shifted his weight, discomfort obvious. In that moment, Richard understood the first value point without anyone spelling it out. The refinance depended on clean funds, and clean funds were now a question because I had asked for a pause, and that pause implied review, and review implied potential misuse. He had used my trust in ways that would not survive daylight. He had assumed no one would ever ask. Evan spoke, his voice small and raw. Lux, what is this? I watched his face crumble, the second value point arriving as reality. He had repeated it is normal for months, and now he was learning what normal really looked like when you stepped outside their house. Celeste moved fast, stepping toward the bank representative with a pleading smile. We can explain, she said. She looked at me next, her eyes no longer amused, no longer superior. They were alarmed. We can all talk about this privately? Richard took a half step toward me, jaw-tight, voice low, but shaking with control, forced back into place. You are embarrassing this family, he hissed. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain my wealth. I did not say anything about Gulfstreams or bombardiers. I simply stood there and let the professionals do their jobs. The pilot waited calmly at the side, as if the rest of the scene was predictable to him. The bank representative turned her tablet slightly. Ms. Lux, she said, we will need written confirmation to pause, and we may need to escalate to compliance for review. I nodded once. Yes, I said. The broker stepped back, his earlier enthusiasm gone. Richard looked around, searching for an ally, but the only allies available here were paperwork and rules, and neither belonged to him. I turned my head slightly toward the bank representative and then toward my phone. If you have ever been laughed at for staying quiet, watch what silence can do. I did not say it out loud to them. I felt it as a promise to the people who would hear my story later, the people who knew what it meant to swallow humiliation, because survival demanded it. My silence had been mistaken for consent. Now it was strategy. While Richard continued to argue with the broker in tense, low bursts, I stepped 2 paces away, pulled out my phone, and sent a single message. Trigger the audit notice. I did not look up when the message delivered. I did not need to. The stage had already shifted, and they could feel it, even if they did not yet understand how far the fall would go. The pause at the hangar did not end when the jet door closed behind us. It followed Richard like a shadow that he could not outrun, because this time it was not gossip or family drama. It was process. It was records. It was systems designed to protect money from exactly the kind of quiet misuse he thought no one would question. In the car back from the terminal, Richard did not speak to me directly. He spoke into his phone voice, sharp, calling someone at the bank, then someone at the aviation broker, then someone I recognized only by the way. Richard lowered his tone into fake authority. He was trying to muscle a machine that does not respond to intimidation. Celeste sat rigid, hands, folded eyes fixed forward, her mouth pressed tight as if she were holding back panic. Evan kept looking at me as if I had changed into someone else in the span of a runway. I stayed quiet. I let them fill the air with their own fear. That night back in Dallas, the first consequence arrived in a form that did not sound dramatic at all. An email from the forensic CPA subject line, simple, followed by an attachment labeled Formal Inquiry Letter. The letter was addressed to Hale Family Office. It requested documentation for all consulting fees paid from the Scholarship Trust, all trustee change requests, and any authority forms submitted in the past 12 months. It listed dates and amounts. It used the kind of language that means someone is building a trail, not asking politely. I printed it, placed a copy in my binder, and then placed the original in my safe deposit box. The next morning, the bank made its move. A representative called and confirmed what I already expected. Due to suspected unauthorized changes, the bank had applied a restriction to accounts associated with my trust until identity and authority could be verified, and until compliance completed a review of recent requests. The representative did not sound alarmed. She sounded professional. That was the power of it. No one needed to yell. The restriction was a lock that only proper authority could open, and proper authority was no longer something Richard could impersonate inside a dining room. When I hung up, I felt the emotional shift inside my chest, not triumph, not revenge, but relief. For years, control had been a hand on my throat that no one saw. Now the pressure was moving off me and onto the people who created it. Richard noticed the restriction almost immediately. He stormed into the room where I was sitting with a cup of tea and a notebook, as if I were the one who had broken a rule in his house. His face was red, his voice loud, and for the first time he did not bother with polite phrasing. "What did you do?" he demanded. "You cannot do this. You cannot touch our accounts." I did not correct his word choice hour because his confusion was useful. I looked up slowly and answered with the same calm that had carried me through the hangar. "I asked for a pause, Richard. That is all." He slammed his phone onto the table and pointed at the screen as if it were evidence of my crime. "They are restricting transfers. The lender is calling me. This is interference. I will sue you." He leaned closer, lowering his voice into a threat meant to sound official. "You are going to regret humiliating me." I kept my expression steady. "You are free to speak to your attorney," I said. He stared at me like he could not understand the absence of fear. Celeste appeared behind him in the doorway, her voice suddenly soft, suddenly pleading. "Lux," she said, "we are all under stress. Let us handle this privately." She tried to meet my eyes. For the first time, she looked older. Evan came in next, hands spread slightly as if he were trying to hold the house together. He started to speak, then stopped because Richard cut him off with a wave. That afternoon, while they argued in rooms with closed doors, I opened my laptop and checked the newest statements that had been routed to my secure access. The restriction did not stop me from seeing the past. It stopped them from moving the future. I looked for patterns, not feelings. That was when the first value point hit with the clean cruelty of numbers. There were 2 additional transactions listed as consulting fees, both in the 7-figure range, both paid to entities with the names that sounded legitimate, but did not match any approved trust purpose. My stomach tightened, not from shock, but from confirmation. They had been doing it repeatedly. This was not a one-time mistake. This was a system. I forwarded the statement pages to the forensic CPA with a single line, "2 more. Please add." A reply came back quickly. "Understood. We will include in the inquiry scope." I did not celebrate. I simply watched the machine turn. The second value point arrived through the same forensic process. My New York attorney called and told me they had traced the notary named on the consent forms. It was not a firm. It was not a stable office with a reputation. It was a mobile notary who traveled to homes and offices, who had prior complaints filed for improper notarizations and sloppy verification. The attorney said it plainly. This notary has a record. That matters. I wrote the notary name in my notebook and underlined it once. Richard had treated notarization like a rubber stamp. He did not understand that stamps leave fingerprints. By midweek, Richard began losing control in a way that showed itself in volume and speed. He called me repeatedly, even when I was in the same house. He sent text messages that sounded like legal threats copied from somewhere else. He left voicemails telling me to stop telling me I was destroying the family, telling me I was unstable. He used the same word Celeste had planted. I saved everything. Evidence is often nothing more than a person revealing themselves consistently. Then the third value point arrived, the one that made the story feel less like numbers and more like lived experience. A message came through a secure email address I had used only once, a channel my attorney suggested for sensitive contact. The sender introduced herself as a former assistant at Hale Family Office. She said she had seen things that bothered her for months. She said Celeste treated staff like objects. She said Richard demanded signatures and documents be rushed through without proper review. She said she had quit because she could not be part of it anymore. At the end of the email, she wrote one sentence that mattered most. I am willing to sign an affidavit. My hand stayed steady as I read it, but inside I felt something shift. It is one thing to fight a family. It is another thing to have a witness step forward because they are tired of being treated badly. I did not reply with emotion. I replied with steps. Thank you. Please speak with my attorney. I copied the attorney, provided the contact, and let the professionals do what they are trained to do. That evening, I made one phone call. I did not announce it. I did not say names. I called the person I needed for the next stage to move smoothly, and I spoke in short sentences. I confirmed timelines. I confirmed that the audit notice had been triggered. I confirmed that the restriction at the bank would remain until the inquiry was satisfied. When I hung up, I did not feel powerful. I felt organized. The next day, Richard received a letter. It arrived by courier, thick envelope, formal header. He opened it in the kitchen in front of Celeste and Evan because he could not wait. I watched from the doorway. His eyes moved across the page. His breathing changed. His hand tightened until the paper creased. He read the line that mattered, and then looked up, finally afraid in a way he could not disguise. Potential civil and criminal exposure. For the first time, his threats stopped sounding like weapons and started sounding like panic. The letter changed the temperature in the house. Richard stopped slamming doors not because he suddenly respected me, but because fear makes even powerful people careful. Celeste began smiling again, not the sharp smile she used at charity events, but a new, softer one that looked like peace until you listened closely and heard the calculation underneath. Evan moved through rooms like he was trying to avoid mirrors. The bank restriction remained. The forensic inquiry continued. The assistant at Hale Family Office was now speaking with my attorney, preparing an affidavit the same way someone prepares a sworn confession to the truth. Every hour that passed brought Richard closer to the point where he could not control the outcome with money or pressure. That was when the invitation came. It was not really an invitation. It was a summons dressed as courtesy. Richard told Evan to tell me we were going to dinner. Then Richard himself appeared in the doorway of my room as if he owned the air. We need to talk privately, he said. He named the place like he expected it to impress me, a well-known Dallas steakhouse where deals were made and reputations were protected. It was his environment, his strong ground. He believed he could still negotiate the truth back into submission. I agreed without emotion because I understood what the meeting really was. It was not reconciliation. It was an attempt to contain damage. The restaurant smelled like butter and char and expensive cologne. The lighting was low, flattering, designed to make people feel important. Richard had chosen a booth in the back, partially hidden, a place where he could talk without being overheard and still feel like he was in control. Celeste arrived in a cream coat hair, perfect eyes soft. Evan arrived last, shoulders tense, jaw tight. Richard stood when I approached, a performance of respect. For years, he never stood for me. He sat. He judged. Now he stood, and it was not kindness. It was strategy. Lux, he said, voice measured as if we were business partners. Thank you for coming. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap, calm, quiet, the way I had sat in the jet when they tried to force a pen into my fingers. Celeste leaned forward with that new, sweet expression. We are family, she said, stretching the words like a warm blanket. We do not need outsiders. We do not need lawyers. We can solve this internally. The way she said internally made my skin tighten, because internal was where they had controlled me. Internal was where evidence disappeared and words were twisted. Richard signaled the server away before menus arrived. No food yet, he said. We are handling something important. He looked at me and lowered his voice. I want this matter resolved. He did not say your trust. He did not say fraud. He said matter because naming the truth would give it weight. Celeste reached across the table and placed her hand near mine, not touching, just close enough to suggest intimacy. "You have been stressed," she said. "You have been confused, but you are smart. Let us be smart together." Evan cleared his throat and finally spoke. "Lux," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I know I have not handled this right. I know I listened to them. But I can fix it. If you help me, I will change. I will stand up for you." He swallowed. "I just need you to stop this before it ruins everything." The first value point hid in his words. He was not asking me to stop because it was wrong. He was asking me to stop because he was terrified of losing his position. Evan continued, eyes pleading. "Dad says there is a way to make it right without destroying the company. If you do this, I can keep my job. I can keep my role. I will treat you differently, I promise." I watched him and felt something quiet in my chest. Not pity, not anger, just clarity. His promise came attached to his fear, not to his character. Richard leaned back and finally placed a folder on the table, smooth controlled the same gesture he used on the jet. He slid it toward me as if he were offering generosity. "Here is what we are prepared to do," he said. "A settlement." The word landed like a disguise. It was not a settlement. It was a bargain. He opened the folder and pointed to a number, a neat figure that looked respectable, until you compared it to what he had taken and what he had tried to transfer. It was low. It was intentionally low. The second value point arrived. Even now, with restriction in place and inquiry letters circulating and affidavits forming, Richard still tried to keep the larger portion for himself. He tried to pay for silence at a discount. Celeste nodded as if the number was fair. "This would help you feel secure," she said. "This would let you move forward without bitterness." Richard watched my face. He expected me to react emotionally. He expected outrage. He expected tears. He expected negotiation. Instead, I opened the folder, read the page, and then set it down gently as if it were something fragile and unimportant. Then I looked directly at Richard and delivered the sentence that had been waiting in me for months. "You laughed when you thought I could not read contracts." My voice was even, not loud, not trembling, not dramatic. The words were not a threat. They were a record. Richard's eyes narrowed. Celeste's sweet smile slipped for half a second before she rebuilt it. Evan looked down at his hands. I continued, not adding new twists, not changing the terms of what was already in motion, simply stating the real requirements that the system demanded and that my outline demanded. "If you want this to end," I said, "then we do it properly. Return the money, all of it. Replace the trustee. Sign an affidavit confirming what was submitted and by whom. Withdraw every false filing you sent to the bank." Richard's jaw tightened. Celeste inhaled sharply, the first sound of real alarm. Evan lifted his head quickly. "Lux," he whispered, "you are asking for too much." "Too much," I repeated softly, and the word tasted strange because too much was what they had taken. Richard leaned forward, his voice sharpening. "You do not understand how this works," he said, reverting to the tone he used when he told me. "I did not get opinions on money I did not earn. Those documents were handled for the family. Mistakes happen. We are offering you a path. Take it." I kept my posture still. "I understand exactly how it works," I said. That was not a mistake. That was control. Celeste reached across the table again, voice sweet again now with a tremor underneath. "Lux, honey," she said, "do not do this to Evan. We are family. We can explain. We can make you comfortable. We can apologize." She used apology like a coin, cheap and convenient. I looked at her and did not argue. An apology without restitution is just a request for silence. Richard tapped the folder, impatient. "The number is generous," he said. "You will not get better if you keep pushing." He paused, then tried a new tactic, lowering his voice into a threat that sounded like wisdom. "If you continue, you will be buried in legal fees. You will ruin your own life." This was his last familiar weapon: fear of cost, fear of being out-resourced. I did not flinch because I had already built the process to withstand that. I slid the folder back toward him without touching it again. No, I said. Richard's nostrils flared. Celeste's eyes hardened. Evan looked like he might stand up, then sat back down defeated by his own dependence. Richard's face tightened, and he delivered the threat that had always been waiting underneath his politeness. "You will regret humiliating me," he said. The words were meant to end the conversation, to remind me who he believed he was. I met his stare and answered with the calm that had carried me through the hangar and the restriction and the inquiry letters. "I did not humiliate you. You did." I stood not abruptly, not theatrically, simply ending the meeting the way you end a negotiation when the other side refuses the only terms that matter. As I turned to leave, I paused long enough to offer one short line to the invisible audience, the people who know what coercive control feels like when it is dressed in luxury. Tell me in the comments, would you forgive this or finish it legally? Then I walked out of Richard's favorite room, leaving him sitting in his own power, finally realizing it was not working anymore. The fall did not arrive with headlines or flashing cameras. It arrived the way real consequences do in wealthy circles, quietly, efficiently, and without spectacle. After the steakhouse meeting, Richard returned to the routines that had always protected him: calls, lunches, memberships, favors. But the routines no longer answered the same way. The first shift came from the lenders who had once competed for his business. A relationship manager who used to reply within minutes sent a brief email acknowledging receipt and stating that all active discussions were paused pending review. Another lender followed with similar language: no accusations, no drama. Just the slow tightening of access that people like Richard fear more than public shame. He tried to push through it by leaning on old connections, but the phrase that kept appearing in polite correspondence was legal risk. Risk makes money cautious. Risk makes doors close without explanation. Within days, a real estate transaction that had been discussed for months was removed from the calendar. The buyer cited concerns related to source of funds and requested additional verification that could not be produced quickly. The deal died without an argument. That was the first value point. Money that once moved on trust now required proof, and proof exposed the questions Richard had tried to bury. At the same time, the board-level conversation shifted. Partners who had smiled through his presentations asked for time. Time became delay. Delay became freeze. A joint venture was paused pending compliance review. Another partnership requested updated disclosures. Richard tried to reassure them with confident language, but confidence does not replace documentation. When you build power on assumption, the moment assumption fails, the structure creaks. Hale Family Office became the center of attention in a way it never had before. Not admiration, but scrutiny. The formal inquiry letter from the forensic accountant triggered internal reviews. Accounts were reconciled, permissions were checked. The second value point landed when staff began to leave, not loudly, quiet resignations. An assistant accepted a position elsewhere. An analyst requested a leave. A senior administrator declined to sign off on routine processes, citing uncertainty. The office that once ran on unquestioned authority now hesitated at every step. Richard noticed the change in posture before he noticed the change in numbers. People spoke carefully. Emails became formal. Conversations ended sooner. The audit expanded as audits do when initial findings raise more questions. Meanwhile, the social consequences began to surface in the places that mattered most to Celeste. Invitations slowed. The country club calendar filled without their name attached to prominent events. At a luncheon, someone smiled politely and asked how things were going with the review. The question was gentle, but the implication was sharp. Status is fragile when it relies on perception. Celeste had always curated perception. Now perception drifted beyond her control. The third value point arrived when she was quietly removed from a committee she had chaired for years. The explanation was neutral, a temporary restructuring. Everyone understood what it meant. She returned home early that afternoon and did not speak during dinner. Evan felt the consequences differently. Compliance risk does not argue with youth or intention. It only measures exposure. The role he held existed because the family name promised stability. Once that promise cracked, the position became a liability. He was called into a meeting framed as a precaution. The language was gentle but final. Until matters were resolved, his responsibilities would be reassigned. He would be placed on leave. No accusation, no defense, just removal. Evan came home with his badge in his pocket and sat on the edge of the bed staring at nothing. He did not blame me. He did not defend me either. He simply absorbed the reality that dependence always ends the same way. Richard attempted to counter the collapse by accelerating influence. He called people he had not spoken to in years. He offered explanations that sounded reasonable until they reached the word audit. Audit makes people careful because audits do not negotiate. The request that followed him everywhere was documentation. The one thing he could not produce quickly without implicating himself. The circles that once protected him now protected themselves. That is how public fall works in wealthy communities. Not with spectacle, but with subtraction. Each subtraction left him smaller. The house felt quieter. The phone rang less. The confident stride softened. I observed from a distance without comment. This was not revenge. This was consequence unfolding according to systems designed to protect capital, not egos. The people who mattered understood that the safest position was distance. Distance spread. Richard noticed it at the club when a familiar group chose a different table. He noticed it when a long-scheduled dinner was postponed indefinitely. He noticed it when a board member asked for a pause that did not include a new date. Celeste noticed it when she opened social media and saw photographs from events she had not attended. She closed the app and set the phone down without speaking. At Hale Family Office, the audit deepened. Requests arrived for transaction histories, explanations, approvals. The office complied where it could and stalled where it could not. The phrase unauthorized changes appeared in correspondence. The notary question surfaced again. Staff began documenting conversations. Fear changes behavior faster than loyalty ever could. The office lost momentum. The brand lost confidence. Richard tried to regain control by reframing the narrative within the family. He called it a misunderstanding. He used the word mistake. He implied outside interference. But the outside no longer listened. Lenders protect balance sheets, not stories. Boards protect governance, not pride. Clubs protect reputation by removing risk. All of it aligned without coordination because incentives aligned. I did not add pressure. I did not speak publicly. I did not correct rumors. Silence allowed the system to do what it was built to do. The real estate deal that collapsed became a reference point. Another buyer stepped away. A third requested indemnities that were refused. Each refusal narrowed the path. Celeste attempted to salvage standing by hosting a small gathering. Attendance was polite and thin. Conversations avoided the obvious. When people avoid the obvious, it means the obvious is heavy. Evan asked me once if there was anything I could do to stop it. I told him the same truth I had told Richard. Truth does not negotiate. The final call came late one evening. Richard's number appeared on my phone after days of silence. I answered without emotion. His voice sounded older, lower, controlled but strained. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding, he said. One sentence from me could help. I looked at the city lights outside the window and answered evenly. Truth does not negotiate. I ended the call and let the quiet return. The noise faded not all at once, but in layers the way a storm leaves a city, quiet street by street. After the call stopped and the meetings ended, and the urgent language disappeared from my days, I finally had space to rebuild without defending myself. The first thing I did was finish the work that mattered most. The trustee change was completed carefully and correctly, with documentation reviewed twice and confirmations sent to addresses I controlled. The scholarship and legacy fund was restored to its original purpose, and then strengthened, so it could never be used as leverage again. I did not announce it. I did not celebrate it. I simply watched the confirmations arrive and felt my shoulders lower for the first time in months. The process was methodical because peace is not dramatic. Peace is procedural. I reviewed the structure with my attorney and chose protections that matched the reality I had just lived through. Some assets remained flexible under a revocable structure so I could adapt over time. Others were placed where access required more than persuasion. The explanation was simple and grounded. These layers existed to protect beneficiaries from coercion and from misuse. No one would ever be able to reroute the fund quietly again. That was the first value point. Security is not secrecy. It is clarity backed by rules. I then set beneficiary guidelines in plain language. Funds were designated for education support mentorship and recovery assistance for women rebuilding after financial control. The terms were specific enough to prevent abuse and broad enough to serve real needs. Requests would be reviewed by an independent committee with transparent criteria. Decisions would be documented. Appeals would be allowed. I built the process the way I wish someone had built one for me years earlier. That was the second value point. Money stops being a weapon when its purpose is written clearly and enforced consistently. As the legal work concluded, I made a decision about my personal boundaries. I did not dramatize it. I did not announce it to the family. I simply stepped out of the marriage in the only way that made sense for my life. Some people leave physically. Some leave emotionally. Some draw a line and refuse to cross it again. I chose the version that aligned with who I had become. There would be no returning to rooms where my voice had been managed, no negotiating access to what was already mine, no more explanations to people who only listened when they felt threatened. The boundary was quiet and permanent. Healing followed the way it usually does, slowly and without an audience. Mornings felt different. Evenings were calm. I began to notice small things again, like the way light moved across the floor, or how silence could be full instead of heavy. I spent time reviewing the fund impact reports, not because I needed to control them, but because I wanted to understand the difference between power and stewardship. The difference was responsibility. I chose responsibility. The third value point arrived unexpectedly in a simple message. It came from the pilot who had spoken that one sentence on the jet, the sentence that had turned control into exposure. The message was short and respectful. "Proud of you, Mom." I read it once and did not forward it or save it anywhere special. I replied with a single word: "Thank you." That exchange mattered because it contained no performance. It was recognition without spectacle. I returned to routines that belonged to me rather than to systems that required permission. Walks without schedules, work without commentary, decisions made quietly and carried out completely. I did not check social calendars. I did not ask who was attending which event. The people who mattered reached out in their own time. The people who did not fell away without confrontation. I noticed that peace does not argue. It simply exists and lets everything else adjust around it. I kept my attention on the fund and on the women it would support. Each approval felt like a small correction to a system that had once tried to erase me. Each mentorship connection felt like a conversation I wished I had been allowed to have earlier in my life. I was careful not to turn healing into another form of control. Oversight mattered, but trust mattered too. Systems were there to support, not to dominate. That balance was intentional. One afternoon, a plain envelope arrived without fanfare. It sat on the table longer than necessary before I opened it. The return address belonged to Hale Family Office. The words inside were brief and formal. Final request. There was no apology, no ownership. Just language designed to reopen a door I had already closed. I did not respond immediately. I placed the letter back in the envelope and set it aside. The quiet did not break. It held. That was how I knew the boundary was real. I opened the envelope from Hale Family Office the next morning, while the coffee cooled beside the window. The paper inside was clean and formal and careful with language. It acknowledged the findings. It requested coordination. It proposed timelines for restitution and compliance. There was no apology and no attempt to explain motive. It was an administrative ending to a story that had tried to end me quietly months earlier. I forwarded the letter to my attorney and closed the folder that had carried my name through the storm. The resolution moved the way resolutions do when systems work. Money that had been taken was returned with penalties and fees that made the lesson expensive. Agreements were amended, oversight was installed. Richard signed what he had refused to sign at the steakhouse because refusal was no longer an option. The first value point arrived without drama. Restitution cleared in tranches, verified and documented and acknowledged. The cost was not only financial, it was reputational and operational and permanent. He paid because the alternative was worse. Evan faced his own consequences. No announcement softened the outcome. His role was not restored. Compliance risk does not forget. He was offered a smaller position elsewhere without authority and without the family shield. The path forward existed, but it was narrow and it required work. There was no fast reset. That was the second value point. Accountability does not end a life, but it changes the terrain. Celeste withdrew from public life the way people do when applause becomes uncertain. The circles that once affirmed her taste and judgment found other hosts. She did not call me again. Silence can be a choice when speech offers no leverage. I did not take satisfaction in that. I noticed it and moved on. The work that mattered was already underway. The scholarship fund began its next cycle with new rules and independent review. Mentorship programs were staffed by women who understood rebuilding after financial control because they had lived it. Decisions were recorded. Appeals were heard. Transparency replaced persuasion. I attended meetings quietly and listened more than I spoke. Stewardship feels different from power. It requires patience. Months later, I traveled for a routine review. A small regional airport this time, not a spectacle, not a statement. The third value point unfolded in a simple scene. I walked across the tarmac with a carry-on and a folder and nothing else. The aircraft waiting was not described in numbers or names in my mind, because it was a tool, not a symbol. The crew greeted me with professionalism and no performance. I took my seat and reviewed notes as the door closed. There was no laughter aimed at me, no pen pressed into my hand, no demand disguised as protection. The quiet felt earned. This was where the story allowed the truth to be seen without noise. For the first time, I said it plainly without embellishment and without apology. I own a fleet. The fact existed in the background of my life the way infrastructure exists beneath a city. It had never been the point. The point was what it allowed me to protect: mobility without permission, privacy without isolation, capacity without coercion. I did not build it to impress anyone. I built it to make sure no one could trap me again with paperwork and smiles. The wow was not the number or the machines or the access. The wow was that quiet power does not need witnesses. It only needs purpose. The fund continued to grow because trust grows when trust is deserved. Women wrote letters about returning to school, about starting over, about learning to read statements without fear. Mentors reported progress without embellishment. The system held because it was designed to. I visited a classroom once and sat in the back without introduction. Watching someone learn again after being told they did not deserve an opinion is a kind of wealth that does not show up on statements. That was the ending I wanted. Richard complied with the terms and kept his distance. The consequences remained expensive and visible to those who mattered. He did not recover the authority he once enjoyed. That loss was proportional to the harm he had tried to normalize. Evan rebuilt slowly and privately. He did not ask me to fix it. He learned that autonomy cannot be borrowed. I did not reconcile. I did not seek revenge. I closed the loop and let the system finish its work. The reflection came easily at the end because it had been forming all along. Control hides in ordinary places. It uses politeness and expertise in family language. It counts on silence and on the belief that speaking will cost more than staying quiet. The exit is rarely loud. It is procedural and patient and exact. If you build evidence and boundaries the way institutions build them, control collapses under its own weight. I share this not to celebrate a fall, but to mark a way out. If you have ever been controlled through money, share this with someone who needs a way out. And if you want to see what happens next time, when a family office meets a real audit, stay with me, because next time, I will tell you exactly how that ends.